Hannah Park used to believe stability was something you earned through discipline and patience. She worked before sunrise, balancing reports, calls, and quiet sacrifices nobody ever praised. At dinner, she smiled while her husband June spoke proudly about his expanding company. Friends admired their marriage, calling them a power couple with perfect timing and luck. Hannah nodded politely, because correcting the story felt petty and strangely disloyal. Behind every deal June celebrated, she had drafted the numbers, risks, and contingencies. She never asked for credit, only for respect inside the walls of their home. For years, that seemed like a reasonable trade, even when she felt unseen. She told herself love meant building together, even when the spotlight chose one face. And if she sometimes felt lonely, she blamed stress, not the life they created. Their apartment looked like success: glass, steel, and framed photos from donor galas. June loved those photos most because they proved he belonged among important names. Hannah loved them less because she remembered the arguments that happened before each smile. Still, she kept arranging their world, smoothing edges so June could stay admired. When he forgot anniversaries, she excused it as ambition, not carelessness or entitlement. When he started taking late meetings, she trusted his explanations without demanding evidence. She even helped rehearse his speeches, shaping his confidence like a tailor fits suits. Sometimes she caught a strange look in his eyes when money was mentioned. It wasn't greed exactly, more like hunger for control that never felt fully satisfied. Hannah noticed, then dismissed it, because suspicion felt like betrayal in reverse. The first crack came quietly, like a hairline fracture you only see in the sun. A banker called asking to confirm a signature Hannah didn't remember placing anywhere. June laughed it off, saying the assistant must have mixed up forms during a rush. Hannah wanted to believe him, so she let the moment pass without a second question. Then she found a folder in their home office, labeled with her name, oddly thick. Inside were copies of documents she had never reviewed, yet they carried her initials. Her stomach tightened as she recognized her handwriting, carefully imitated, dangerously convincing. She confronted June softly, giving him the chance to explain with honesty and remorse. He kissed her forehead, called her anxious, and promised everything was perfectly handled. Hannah nodded again, because he sounded certain, and certainty can feel like safety. But that night, sleep wouldn't come, and her thoughts kept walking back to the folder. She replayed every recent conversation, noticing how often June redirected details with charm. She remembered how he praised her loyalty whenever she asked about numbers or timelines. It felt less like appreciation now, and more like training a guard dog to stay calm. At 2:13 a.m., she opened her laptop and checked the company's shared drive access. Several permissions had changed, and her admin status looked reduced without any notification. She stared at the screen, suddenly aware that trust can be engineered and weaponized. In the dark reflection, she barely recognized the woman who kept choosing peace over clarity. For the first time, she wondered if her kindness had been used as a key, and she understood something frightening. If June was hiding this, he was hiding worse. Morning arrived without relief, only sharper clarity disguised as routine. Hannah prepared coffee while June scrolled through messages, relaxed, untouched by concern. He spoke about upcoming meetings as if nothing fragile existed between them. She listened carefully, noticing how often he said handled instead of explained. That word lingered, heavy, like something buried rather than resolved. When she asked about the banker again, his smile tightened for half a second. He reminded her she trusted him, framing doubt as a flaw in her character. Hannah apologized, even though the apology tasted wrong in her mouth. She left for work with a knot in her chest and silence in her phone. Trust, she realized, had slowly turned into a one-way obligation. At the office, she tried focusing on numbers, but patterns kept breaking apart. Emails copied to her suddenly excluded her from final approvals and financial summaries. A junior analyst hesitated when Hannah asked about a restructuring she never authorized. The hesitation spoke louder than any answer, filling the room with unspoken truth. During lunch, she checked public filings, something she had not done in years. Her name appeared repeatedly, tied to decisions she never remembered making. Loans, risk transfers, and asset reallocations all carried her digital signature. The scale of it felt impossible, too large for a simple misunderstanding. Hannah felt heat rise behind her eyes, not tears yet, just pressure. Someone had rewritten her professional identity without her consent. That evening, she didn't confront June immediately, choosing observation over emotion. She watched how easily he navigated conversations, how practiced his calm sounded. He spoke about future plans that excluded her input entirely. When she mentioned returning to a leadership role, he dismissed it gently. He said it wasn't necessary anymore, that she deserved rest after everything, she thought, meaning the work he now claimed as his own. Later, she accessed a private email archive she once helped secure. There, she found forwarded threads discussing how useful her credibility had been. The messages were clinical, strategic, written as if she were an asset. In that moment, betrayal stopped being emotional and became unmistakably deliberate. She sat alone in the living room while the city lights flickered outside. Her phone buzzed with a notification about a pending legal inquiry. It listed her as the primary responsible party for irregular transactions. The realization hit slowly, then all at once, stealing the air from her lungs. June wasn't just hiding mistakes. He was positioning her as protection. Every sacrifice she made had been converted into a shield for his ambition. Hannah finally understood that love had been repurposed into liability. She didn't cry, because shock has its own numb discipline. She simply closed her eyes and accepted a brutal truth. The betrayal was not personal anymore. It was structural and intentional. The inquiry moved faster than Hannah expected, stripping control before she could react. Compliance officers requested statements, freezing accounts linked to her credentials. Her phone rang constantly, but the voices were formal, distant, already convinced. June advised her to stay calm, promising his lawyers would sort things out. He spoke as if this inconvenience belonged to her alone, not to their shared life. When she asked to see the legal strategy, he said it was too complex. That word again, complex, used to keep her outside the room. Hannah felt the ground shift as authority drained from her name. Colleagues avoided eye contact, unsure whether loyalty was now a risk. Reputation, she learned, collapses quietly before it ever shatters loudly. The board placed her on immediate leave pending investigation. No ceremony, no defense, just a controlled removal disguised as protocol. Her access badge stopped working before she reached the elevator. Security escorted her with polite smiles that felt rehearsed and cold. She watched the doors close on the office she had built piece by piece. Outside, the city sounded indifferent, traffic moving as if nothing had changed. News alerts began circulating, carefully worded but unmistakably accusatory. Her name appeared beside phrases like financial irregularities and misconduct. Each headline erased years of credibility in a single paragraph. Hannah realized truth rarely travels as fast as accusation. At home, June maintained distance under the pretense of damage control. He took calls behind closed doors, lowering his voice when she entered. When reporters appeared downstairs, he suggested she stay out of sight. It sounded protective, but felt like containment. He told friends she was overwhelmed, unstable, not herself lately. Those words spread quickly, softening suspicion around him. Hannah saw how narrative works when shaped early and confidently. The story no longer needed facts, only repetition. She tried reaching allies, but most calls went unanswered. Silence, she discovered, is how networks politely abandon you. The final blow arrived in an envelope delivered without warning. Charges were being formally considered, pending further evidence review. Her legal exposure was outlined with unsettling precision. June stood nearby, calm, already prepared for this outcome. He suggested separation, framing it as a strategic necessity. If she fought publicly, he warned, everything would get worse. Hannah understood then that she was meant to absorb the fall. The system had already chosen its scapegoat. She signed nothing, said nothing, and packed a single bag. As she left, she knew the descent had truly begun. The apartment she moved into was small, quiet, and deliberately anonymous. No glass walls, no city view, no symbols of the life she lost. Hannah chose it because anonymity felt safer than luxury now. Each morning, she woke without alarms, yet sleep never felt restorative. Her name was still everywhere online, framed by speculation and judgment. She stopped checking headlines after realizing they changed nothing. Time slowed, stretching days into long corridors of thought and memory. She replayed every decision, searching for the exact moment she surrendered control. The silence forced honesty she had postponed for years. She was no longer surviving shock, she was learning its weight. Money became a careful calculation, not a tool of freedom. Accounts remained frozen while investigations continued without clear timelines. She sold jewelry she once considered sentimental, now reduced to liquidity. Each transaction felt like shedding a layer of her former identity. Pride dissolved quickly when independence is at stake. Hannah learned how fast respect disappears when influence is removed. Friends she trusted avoided questions by avoiding her entirely. Others offered sympathy without commitment, words without action. She accepted help sparingly, knowing dependence creates new vulnerabilities. This version of life demanded discipline without recognition. One evening, she received a message from a former compliance consultant. He didn't accuse or console, only asked a single precise question. "Did you authorize the restructuring tied to the overseas subsidiary?" Hannah replied honestly, attaching dates and documented inconsistencies. Hours later, he responded with one sentence that changed everything. "Then someone worked very hard to make it look like you did." That was the first time someone acknowledged intent, not incompetence. The thought settled slowly, reshaping her understanding of the collapse. This was not chaos, it was design. And design always leaves patterns behind. She sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, documents spread carefully. For the first time since the fall, she didn't feel overwhelmed. Anger arrived, but it was controlled, measured, almost useful. She stopped asking why this happened and started asking how. How signatures were replicated, how access was rerouted, how narratives formed. She mapped timelines instead of emotions, facts instead of fear. The woman who once avoided confrontation now embraced precision. Hannah understood something fundamental in that quiet room. No one was coming to save her, and that was clarity. From the ruins of reputation, intention began to form. Hannah stopped waiting for external timelines and created her own structure. She organized every document by date, access point, and authorization level. What once felt overwhelming now resembled a system waiting to be understood. She noticed how certain approvals clustered around June's travel schedules. Key changes happened when he knew she would be unavailable or distracted. Patterns emerged where chaos had been carefully staged. This wasn't recklessness, it was rehearsal repeated until flawless. Understanding that shifted her posture from defensive to analytical. Fear loosened its grip when logic took control. She was no longer reacting, she was reconstructing the truth. She reached out quietly to people who valued accuracy over loyalty. Former auditors, compliance specialists, analysts who respected clean records. She never asked for favors, only verification. Facts traveled slowly, but they traveled honestly. Each confirmation restored a small piece of internal balance. She learned which institutions preserved logs longer than required. She learned which systems never truly forget user behavior. The deeper she went, the clearer the manipulation became. Her name had been used, but her habits had not. That discrepancy became her strongest leverage. Emotionally, she hardened without becoming cruel. She stopped romanticizing the past, seeing it clearly for the first time. Love had not blinded her, comfort had. She accepted responsibility for the silence she once chose. That acceptance removed shame from the equation. Shame weakens strategy. Clarity strengthens it. Hannah began rebuilding not her image, but her position. She stayed invisible on purpose, letting assumptions settle undisturbed. People underestimate what they believe is already finished. That underestimation created space for preparation. Weeks passed, then months, marked by progress instead of headlines. Legal pressure remained, but now it felt navigable. She drafted counter-narratives supported by time-stamped evidence. Each file told a story far more precise than public opinion. She rehearsed nothing aloud, keeping plans internal and flexible. Her patience deepened, no longer tied to hope, only readiness. Hannah understood that justice doesn't rush, it waits. When the time came, exposure would be clean and undeniable. The woman who once avoided conflict now mastered timing. This was not recovery, it was transformation. Hannah re-entered professional spaces without announcing her return. She attended industry events under consulting titles that carried no attention. People spoke freely around her, assuming her relevance had expired. That assumption granted access no resume ever could. She listened more than she spoke, collecting fragments of truth. Every careless comment added weight to what she already knew. Power, she realized, reveals itself when it thinks it is unobserved. She kept her presence minimal and her records meticulous. Invisibility became a strategic advantage, not a loss. She was learning the architecture of influence from the shadows. She began working with a small investment group overseas. Nothing tied directly to her past or to June's collapsing network. They valued her precision, not her public image. For the first time, her expertise stood alone without translation. She rebuilt credibility transaction by transaction, quietly and legally. Each success restored confidence without triggering attention. Money returned slowly, but control returned immediately. She no longer confused scale with security. Everything she built now included exit paths and safeguards. Trust was redesigned, not assumed. June's name surfaced occasionally in conversations she overheard. His tone had shifted in others' voices, admiration thinning into caution. Questions were being asked in rooms she was no longer barred from. She never reacted, never corrected, never intervened. Momentum didn't need encouragement, only space. The systems he exploited were beginning to audit themselves. Hannah tracked these developments without emotional attachment. This was no longer personal, it was procedural. She understood that collapse often starts long before it becomes visible, and she was already positioned beyond the blast radius. Internally, she finalized what justice meant to her. Not humiliation, not revenge, not spectacle. Justice meant accuracy restored and responsibility correctly assigned. It meant reclaiming authorship over her own history. She prepared disclosures designed to answer questions, not provoke outrage. Evidence was organized to be undeniable, not dramatic. Timing mattered more than force. When the truth emerged, it would stand on its own. Hannah no longer needed validation to proceed. She was ready to let reality correct the record. The first shift became public through a regulatory bulletin few people noticed. It cited discrepancies tied to transactions June had personally approved. No names were highlighted yet, only processes and accountability gaps. Analysts began re-examining deals once considered settled and harmless. Questions surfaced quietly, the most dangerous kind in institutional spaces. June responded with confidence, issuing statements that sounded rehearsed. But confidence without control leaks through details professionals can't ignore. His explanations contradicted internal logs now under formal review. The narrative he built for years began to show structural weakness. Truth doesn't need volume, it needs alignment. Hannah submitted her evidence through proper channels without commentary. No interviews, no public defense, no emotional framing. The documentation spoke in timestamps, access trails, and authorization conflicts. Investigators noticed immediately how her usage patterns diverged from the alleged actions. Her silence, once seen as guilt, now read as restraint. The inquiry expanded, widening its scope beyond a single name. Assets were re-examined, and oversight intensified across departments. What began as her case transformed into a broader exposure. Institutions protect themselves first, and truth often follows that path. Hannah watched the process advance without interference. June's posture changed as pressure consolidated around him. Meetings were postponed, partners grew cautious, invitations slowed. He reached out to Hannah for the first time in months. His message carried familiarity, then urgency, then subtle negotiation. She replied once, briefly, directing him to speak with counsel. That boundary closed the last informal door between them. Without her credibility as cover, his defenses weakened rapidly. The strategies he used on her failed against documented reality. Control evaporated when accountability replaced charm. The system he manipulated recalibrated with precision. When the findings were released, they were unemotional and definitive. Responsibility was reassigned, and prior conclusions quietly reversed. Hannah's name was cleared without fanfare, just correction. June faced sanctions that dismantled his influence permanently. No courtroom spectacle followed, only professional consequence. The world adjusted its understanding without apology. Reputation, once stripped, returned in a quieter, truer form. Hannah felt no triumph, only resolution. Justice didn't announce itself, it simply arrived. And with it, the final balance was restored. The aftermath unfolded slowly, without celebration or spectacle. Hannah declined interviews, choosing distance over narrative ownership. She understood how quickly stories distort when attention becomes currency. Instead, she focused on rebuilding a life that required no explanation. Opportunities returned, but she selected them with deliberate restraint. Power no longer tempted her unless it came with transparency. She had learned that visibility is optional, but autonomy is not. Every agreement she signed now reflected that lesson clearly. Her rise did not depend on recognition, only on control. And control was finally hers alone. Professionally, her name regained weight in quiet rooms. Not because of sympathy, but because of consistency. People remembered how she handled pressure without spectacle. Trust rebuilt itself through behavior, not correction campaigns. She advised institutions on risk frameworks she once helped design. This time, her role was explicit and protected. She refused partnerships that relied on ambiguity or charm. Clarity became her non-negotiable condition. Those who understood its value stayed. Those who didn't were irrelevant. June disappeared from relevance faster than Hannah expected. Not through disgrace, but through exclusion. Doors closed without confrontation. Calls went unanswered. His name faded from conversations where it once dominated. Legacy dissolved quietly when stripped of access and credibility. Hannah felt no need to witness the decline. Closure didn't require proximity. Some endings are complete without observation. She had already moved beyond that chapter. The past no longer demanded her attention. On a morning that felt ordinary, Hannah paused at her window. The city looked unchanged, but her place within it had shifted. She was no longer defined by betrayal or recovery. Those were events, not identities. What remained was authorship over her own trajectory. She didn't rise to prove anyone wrong. She rose because she refused to remain misrepresented. The betrayal had been real, devastating, and deliberate, but it was only the beginning of a rise built on precision, silence, and unshakable clarity.